I spent a large part of August and the beginning of September this year working on a phonology of Podolian Yiddish, which I may or may not come back to and make adjustments to in the future. For the most part, this was a simple task of reading a Yiddish article on Podolian Yiddish phonology that Uriel Weinreich published first in 1953 and then again in 1958. I only mention the republishing because I accessed the 1958 version, though as far as I can tell, it was just a reprinting of the 1953 article. While my Yiddish isn't perfect, I felt pretty confident I understood the article and could write up an English version in my own words. Then, to make sure I wasn't just rewriting his article, I went ahead and I looked at some other sources. The first being the answer sheets for a town in Podolia that I have family from, Sadanov, from the Language and Culture Atlas of Ashkenazic Jewry. The second being a Paul Glasser article detailing a diachronic and synchronic phonology of Southeastern Yiddish, which includes information, as you might expect, about the subdialect of Podolian Yiddish. This was useful for spelling some things out more than they were in the Uriel Weinreich article, but unfortunately it also raised some questions. Glasser cites another article by Weinreich to say that the pronunciation of vav yud as u was starting to be replaced by oi in the 20th century in Podolia. This would be all well and good, but there are some various reasons for me to believe that this wasn't the case in the part of Podolia Sadanov was in, namely that there were instances of "u" in words that supposedly became "oi" in the answer sheets and on the Sprach Atlas of the Soviet Union for that region of Podolia. I also had anecdotal evidence to the contrary, such as an informant who had a grandparent from Podolia who would have spoken with "u," but this could very well have been due to the pronunciation of "oi" not yet becoming popular when that grandparent was speaking and learning to speak. In any case, something was off here, and I intended to get to the bottom of it. So what was I to do? Just trust Glasser saying that the pronunciation of Vav Yud as U in words like moil, mool had retreated into Bessarabia? Possibly, my data was just outdated and the penetration of Oi hadn't occurred yet when the Sprachatlas was compiled. This would be potentially compelling, but it seemed as though the parts of Podolia and the Sprachatlas that did already have Oi in these words, it was just this little region that included Sadanov that retained U, like in Bessarabia. So I went to Glasser's source, a 1958 article by Uriel Weinreich, this time in English, about the original sound change of the sound becoming oo. In it, he talks about how the Middle High German vowel that notably doesn't have a Semitic equivalent, 1-5 or U4, became oo in various dialects of Yiddish. The article discusses how, at first glance, it would appear to be the original vowel shifting in other dialects while surviving as oo in these dialects. However, his claim is that it actually shifted first to a diphthongized oo before shifting back to oo. This would have little to do with our current problem if it was only about that, but Weinreich also includes two maps of Eastern Yiddish and the distribution of where the vowel was oo and where it was oi or ui and ou or ow, as well as some other maps that are somewhat important for our investigation. The smoking gun is that this oo to oi change has penetrated the vast majority of Podolia, but there are two pockets of Podolia and all of Bessarabia which did not get the sound change in seemingly any words. This is all according to map 2 in the Weinreich article. So what do we have now? A split not only between Podolian and Bessarabian Yiddish and Southeastern Yiddish, but between two different regions of Podolian Yiddish? Now, for a few housekeeping things, I'm just going to answer a few questions. Is this really a sound change? That might seem like an obvious answer, but we'll get to why that is interesting in a second. Are there other phonological differences between these two parts of Podolia? Also might seem unimportant, but we'll get to why it's important in a second. Should these parts of Podolia be considered Bessarabian in dialect, but not geographically? Also, maybe seems unimportant, but we'll get to it in a second. Why I think this is important. So, is this really a sound change? Okay, so this one might sound weird, but hear me out. The oi pronunciation is very, very prevalent in in the parts of northeastern Yiddish directly north of Podolia. This is where the sound change is penetrating from. Now, how do we know that this is really the vowel changing from oo to oi, or if it's just the borrowing of word forms from the north? Uriel Weinreich seems to support the idea that these are just borrowings from the north in certain words, not an actual shift in the vowel. This also makes more sense intuitively. Of course, how could certain words like mool become moil, but buch remains buch, not shifting to the northern pronunciation of boich? If this was truly the vowels shifting, it would certainly cause problems for our understanding of Yiddish vowels and how they developed. So that settles it then. This is a case of the words being borrowed from the north and the parts of Podolia that border the Oi region. Well, probably. I think that is certainly the case, but that all being said, Weinreich and I could both be wrong. This could be a case of the vowel shifting in the northern part of Podolia, but borrowing oo forms from the south and Bessarabia. Of course, this makes less sense, but in theory, one could see it as possible. So, in conclusion, this is most probably not a true sound change from U to Oi, but it certainly presents similarly to one, which is why I keep referring to it as a sound change. Hopefully that makes sense. Now we're going to move on to, are there other phonological differences between these two parts of Podolia? This one has a pretty simple answer because yes, there are. A famous feature of the Podolian dialect is the change from to I in words like shtetl, aka shtiddle. Weinreich, however, points out that this Podolian feature was on its way out, at least since the 1920s. A large portion of southern Podolia instead has the A diphthong in its place, similarly to Bessarabia. Could be argued that this is a more extreme example of what was going on in the north. The Bessarabian pronunciation had taken over southern Podolia and was now penetrating into northern Podolia. But it's also possible that southern Podolia, especially the areas that only have the U pronunciation, just never really got this sound change, and the Podolian generalization of e to I never was representative of the entire geographic region of Podolia. Hopefully that also makes sense. Now we're going to move on to, should these parts of Podolia be considered Bessarabian in dialect but not geographically? I'll make this one as simple as possible and say that while I can't be the one to make that decision, I would argue that they should not be. The reason for this is that there are still distinct phonological features between these parts of southern Podolia and Bessarabia, most notably the alveolar trill, Bessarabia, versus the uvular trill, Podolia. In the LCAJ answer sheets for Sadanov, the informant was asked what an alveolar trill would make you sound like, and the answer was Bessarabian, or Galician, but that's not important to our purposes. So clearly there's a sociolinguistic understanding that these are still two different dialects, even if they share more similarities in certain areas than other Podolian Yiddish does. In conclusion, we've looked at the parts of Podolia where U became Oi, but only in certain words, as well as the parts of Podolia where this didn't happen at all. We've seen how other Podolian features are not universal in Podolia geographically, but we've seen that we should probably still consider the southern Podolian dialect different to the Bessarabian one, even though they may have some similar features that northern Podolia doesn't have. If you enjoyed this video and think you would enjoy others like it, please let me know by liking and subscribing. If you didn't enjoy this video but you somehow made it all the way to the end, feel free to let me know in the comments what you think I can improve on. I don't make a lot of videos on this channel these days, and I'm increasingly busy with other things, but overall I like making these things and sharing them with the world. So if you have any ideas for videos like this one, and also let me know that in the comments. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions or corrections, let me know in the comments as well, and I'll do my best to get back to you.